Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome POLITICO national security reporter Jacqueline Klimas.
Well, great. Good morning, everyone. I am Jacqueline Klimas. I'm POLITICO's national security reporter. Before we kick off our conversation today, I just want to take a minute to thank the USO for organizing this great event today. POLITICO is so proud to be the media partner, and to thank all of you for joining us both here in person and online via the live stream. So many of us know the numbers, but I think they bear repeating to sort of set the stage for our conversation. The unemployment rate of military spouses is 3 times the national average, and even of those military spouses that are employed, many are underemployed. So our conversation today is going to focus on careers in the technology field, how military spouses can break into that world, take advantage of it, what sort of tools and resources there are, and what policymakers in Washington can do to make that transition easier. So I'd like to introduce you all to our panel today. We have retired Marine Corps Major General Chris Cortez, who is the Vice President of Military Affairs at Microsoft. Next to him, we have Liza Rodewald, who is a military spouse and is also the co-founder of MadSkills, which is a website that links up military spouses with remote employment opportunities, both in the tech world and beyond. And last but not least, Eddy Mentzer, another military spouse who also serves as the Associate Director for Child, Youth, and Families at the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense. So thank you all to our panelists for joining us. And a quick reminder for those both in the audience and on the live stream to please join in on our conversation. You can use the hashtag #MilSpouseSalute on Twitter. And I have an iPad on stage so I can be tracking questions from those who are joining us remotely. So without further ado, let's kick off the conversation. So military spouses face a number of issues and challenges, from difficulty finding childcare to licenses not transferring across state lines to constant moves that disrupt potential for promotions at work. So Liza, I'd like to start with you. How can a career in technology help alleviate some of those challenges, and why is it the right choice for military spouses?
Well, careers in technology are first and foremost very flexible, and I think that solves a lot of the problems that military spouses face whenever they're moving and transitioning. I was a software engineer for 15 years, and I worked remotely that entire time. So when I became a military spouse and we started moving around, I didn't lose my career because I was already plugged into the technology space, already doing software engineering. And so I think, they're high demand jobs. They're high paying, so you can afford the childcare, you can afford those things because you're getting paid very well. And they're very flexible in terms of being able to work remotely and being able to keep the same job as you move around to the different stations.
So you talked about the high demand. Chris, I'm hoping I can get you to elaborate on that a little more. We all obviously use technology more and more in our everyday lives. Can you talk a little bit about how the innovation economy is changing across the US and across the world, and what sort of job opportunities there'll be in this realm in 5 or 10 years?
Well, technology is everywhere, and it continues to expand. And whether it's the personal lifestyle, whether it's business, it's just growing. And it's the industry that's going to grow the most into the future. So the demand is there. What we did at Microsoft in terms of the military, we looked at the fact that 200,000 would leave the military every year. We have thousands of jobs in our company that go unfilled. And code.org says there's 490 technology jobs out there in America that are unfilled. So we thought, why not combine all those jobs that are available and so many military people that are living. And we created a program for the transitioning military member and veterans called the Microsoft Software and Systems Academy. It's an 18-week program. You get through that, you can get a job in the technology, not a job, a career in the technology industry, which, as you say, is growing. So we have a 93% graduation rate, 95% are employed, or a few went back to college, and we have over 360 companies that have hired from our program. So this program is working really well. Been doing it for 5 years. And we looked at the military spouse and we said, you know what? We got to give this a shot, because they're unemployed, they're underemployed, they're super talented, but they move every few years and they have to quit what they're doing and start something over again. And what a great field to be in, technology, because you can be portable. You don't have to quit your job. Your company can let you go and take that career, not a job, career with you. So we really looked at this very closely through Blue Star Families, which is nationally known as an organization that looks at the military family, looks at the military spouse and child. And we did focus groups. And all this to build a pilot that would be set the conditions for success for the military spouse. I told you the program that we started, MSSA, is 18 weeks, but for the military spouse pilot, which we cut the ribbon on September 28th, that's going to be 22 weeks. Why? It's going to be a little bit longer because the military spouse has responsibilities, obligations, and we wanted to make this thing work. So we have 19 spouses, one male. DOD population is about 92% female spouses. And we know in the technology industry, not only we have all these open roles, but there's a paucity of females in the technology industry. So we're going at this trying to create an opportunity for the military spouse. And also, we know that we need more females in the industry. So all that to say, there's a ton of opportunity in the technology industry, and we're giving this a shot. We're going to see how this pilot works. I'm very confident that all 19 of the members of this first pilot that we have going are going to have successful experience on the other end.
So, Eddy, it's partly the job of private industry to help with these training pipelines, but it's also the job of the Pentagon to try to help prepare military spouses for careers. So can you talk a little bit about what the Pentagon is doing now in terms of training, and if it's looking more at prep for tech careers to take advantage of this growing economy?
Definitely, and we all know as military spouses ourselves those challenges that we go through, and as a military spouse, I've been through those challenges as well. I'm very fortunate to have a federal career that's lasted 28 years, but 3.5 years of that is on leave without pay. Every time we've made that change, that PCS. When we look at technology, I think from a departmental perspective, one of the big aspects is partnering with industry. So both of the representatives here, Liza and the General, Microsoft and MadSkills, are partners with the DoD, looking for opportunities within all sectors. I think one of the challenges we sometimes have is that we tend to judge a book by its cover. Technology permeates everything. There is not an industry in the US that does not have a technological aspect. We look at Microsoft, we look at the work that MadSkills is doing, and we see the technology connection. But think of Starbucks. We don't think of Starbucks as a tech company, but we've all got that app on our phones. There's technology in everything we do. So with spouses that are looking at technology as a career opportunity, they need to look at all employers and see where that tech fits in. From the department, one of the aspects that we really are focused on is education and finding opportunities. The MSSA from Microsoft and the pilot they're doing at JBLM is amazing. And I agree with the General that we will see the same outcomes that we see with our service members and veterans in that program. So we have to educate all the time. Last week I was on Wall Street and speaking with leaders in the banking industry about the challenges that military spouses face. Been focused for so long on veterans, but when we explained that 92% are female, that's a demographic that every industry wants to bring in to their sector. The education levels of military spouses, with 85% having some college education, 25% with a 4-year degree, an additional 10% with an advanced degree. The average age, 30 years old. That is the prime spot for employers. And technology really provides those aspects. So it's partnering with tech firms. It's providing educational opportunities. A lot of military spouses don't know that the department provides no-cost career coaching for military spouses. And we have specific packages designed around the IT and tech field where you can work with your own personal career coach that is going to help you to build that action plan, whether it's the educational aspect or finding the employment at every step along the way. So those are some of the aspects that we're looking at, being able to prepare that spouse and lead them into the tech sector.
Oh, great. So Chris, you've already talked a little bit about the Microsoft program, but I think we can all agree that it would be great if there were more of these that military spouses could take advantage of. So do you have any thoughts on sort of what led you at Microsoft to launch this program and how other companies could mimic it?
Look, we saw the need. I mean, you look at the military spouse and you look how talented they are, and you look at how challenged they are in terms of all the change of stations and quitting the jobs and finding another job. I mean, it's really hard. But here's a talent pool that's readily available that we really haven't paid attention to in the past. So we started this because we know it's the right thing to do at the right time. And I'll tell you this. The pilot spouse program is going to have the same sort of advantages as the other program that we have ongoing. By the way, we started at JBLM 5 years ago at Joint Base Lewis McChord. Now we're on 14 locations across the country. It took us 5 years to graduate the first 1,000. Now we're going to graduate 1,000 every year. That's the transitioning member, service member, and veterans. But I'm going to get back because what I need to say is those that are going through this pilot spouse program are going to benefit from everything we've already built up. They're going to have a guaranteed interview. If not with Microsoft, with one of the hiring partners that we have for a real job. They're going to have that, it's the $70,000, that's average across the country. I mean, it's more if you're in the DC area, it's more if you're in the Pacific Northwest, but the first year, $70,000 starting salary. And, you know, when I talk to young military members, they say, wow, that is really awesome, that's game-changing. That's going to not only change my life, but my entire family. And so when you think about it, the spouse having that job that's going to be portable, I mean, it's really going to be a game-changing opportunity. We can't do it all ourselves. So other companies should do the same thing. I mean, it took us a lot of time, a lot of effort, and we had to get the support from the senior leaders in the company, and they love this. They think this is exactly what we should be doing. And I hope that other companies do the same thing, because there's so much talent out there that's available. I mean, give the military spouse that opportunity. Watch what they'll do when we bring them into the industry. They will be awesome.
I'd like to add a little bit to that, if you don't mind. We create and manage remote teams for companies, and one thing that we see most in military spouses is training is great. We need training, we need these pipelines, but they really need jobs. And we have people coming through these programs, boot camps, learning how to code, working with, but they really need a foot in the door, an internship, a returnship. So I would say corporate America, like, look at some of those programs you have for junior developers, people that are just getting in, like they've taught themselves, they've learned, they've gone through the certifications. Now they need an opportunity to start building their skill sets and to get hired and to be able to start climbing the ladder. So building in those types of programs where, hey, you've got this training, you've got this skill set, here's an internship you can do for 6 months just to give you some hands-on experience so that you can go apply to that next job and you'll be able to get it hands down because you have that level of experience. So, you know, that's one passion of mine. So if there's leaders in the room that are watching and listening, internships, returnships are extremely valuable to the community to give them a chance to demonstrate those skill sets.
You know, I'll just throw in there as well, it's that concept of train to work. And, you know, I was recently on a phone call with a gentleman named Rodrigo Levy, and he runs an organization called Code Platoon. They've been working with service members, transitioning service members, training them in coding, and then connecting them, very similar to the MSSA, directly to industry. And that's where the synergy really makes. So you've got the training and that direct connection. They are now moving into the military spouse space. And I asked, why did you want to do this? And it really came down from word of mouth, seeing the need and seeing an opportunity for military spouses. So as Liza said, in industry needs to look at those opportunities. And we see more and more, the scales are sometimes fairly small. But I think as we see success, we'll continue to see that scale grow. But you've got to have that connection between the training aspect and the employment aspect.
So I think all of you have said that flexibility is one of the key parts of a tech job that makes it advantageous for military spouses. But that flexibility really comes with the ability to work remotely. So Liza, can you talk a little bit about what companies can do to make it easier for military spouses, even maybe some with not a lot of experience, to secure those remote jobs?
Sure. So the tech space is the most remote-friendly space out there. So there are lots of companies that are completely distributed. Envision App is one. They have 700 employees. They all completely work distributed. So the tech space is already set up nicely for remote workers, and they're used to having people work remotely on dev teams and different. As technology grows and advances, it's easier and easier for us to be able to work from wherever. And military spouses make excellent remote workers, which is why we create managed teams basically with military spouses, because you already know how to adapt easily, you're self-starters, all the things that make good remote employees, military spouses inherently have as soft skills. And so companies can start to look in that skill base when they're talking about remote workers because they fit very nicely in there.
So Eddy, you've talked a lot about the partnerships that DoD tries to build with private industry. Microsoft is one of those hiring partners on a list of nearly 400. So what steps are you taking to add new companies to that list? And can you talk about any recent additions?
Yeah, every year we add about 45 to 50 new partners to what's called the Military Spouse Employment Partnership. And these employer partners, what we focus on is large employers. We still feel that at the local installation, your best resource is that local employment readiness office. But when we look at global partners that have large footprints across the U.S., that's really where we focus the Secretary of Defense's efforts in building those partnerships. So this year we added 45 partners. One of our new partners is MadSkills. They're doing amazing things, and it's a spouse-owned business. Liza and Erica have not only solved a challenge that they saw for themselves, but they're solving it for other military spouses. A lot of what we're finding now, when we first started, 50, 60 companies, everybody knew the name of those companies. Bank of America, FedEx, large Amazon, large companies. Now what we're finding, and it's really been an eye-opener to me, is that there are still companies out there that employ 40,000 Americans across the U.S. that none of us had ever heard of. They're not household names. So industry is really helping us to make those connections. As the department is out, and I tell you, across the department, it doesn't matter what service it is, it doesn't matter if it's the Secretary of Defense, everybody is keyed into this challenge. We know that it presents a challenge for retention and for recruitment, and it's important to us as a department. So everybody is promoting that opportunity, and we don't just look at it as jobs. We look at it as educating the company about the challenges so that they can change their cultures to be able to meet the needs. And I think Microsoft provides a great example of that. They saw the need for training, for education for spouses, and they adapted programs they already had. Another one of our partners that's here today, Comcast NBC Universal. When I first started talking with them, they had a very robust veterans employment program. And we all know as military spouses that if it says veterans employment, that doesn't necessarily speak to us as military spouses. If we're in the fine print, we're probably not going to read that far on that page to find ourselves there. So Comcast NBC Universal changed their program's name to the Military and Veteran Employment Program, recognizing the challenges for all members of the military, whether it's the service member or the family member. And that's kind of the cultural change that we're enabling as well within organizations.
So we've talked about what private sector is doing, what the federal government is doing. There's also a big group of people on Capitol Hill who could be taking steps to help military spouses. So Liza, do you have any thoughts on ways that Congress could act to make it easier for both military spouses to work remote jobs and for more companies to employ military spouses remotely?
Yes, so one of our pain points has been just compliance and registering with the states. As you can imagine, as a company who my co-founder and I live in Hawaii, she lives in Tampa. We started the business, I was in New York, she was in Virginia. We're a Delaware C Corp, and we're all over the place. So just business registration, like some kind of global initiative to help us in that would be amazing. And we employ spouses, so we have 43 spouses working for us all over the place. And so we have to register as employers in that state, and then they are working in that state, but they are a resident of another state. And you can imagine, I mean, I'm speaking to the choir probably with most of the spouses here, it gets very complicated. So some legislation to help smooth out that process. Military spouse business owners, when they start businesses, the first thing they do is they hire more military spouses. And so our company is not the first to have to deal with it, and we won't be the last. So I think it's a very important issue to bring.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of the training that military spouses might be getting at for-profit schools. Eddy, if I can ask you about this. Earlier this year, the administration eliminated a program that sought to hold for-profit schools accountable for their students' success after graduation. So what is the Defense Department doing to make sure military spouses who are using federal benefits are using them places that can help them succeed?
You know, it's always a challenge for anyone, whether it's a military spouse, a service member, or a civilian, to determine what is the best program, the best school for me to reach my goals when it comes educationally. So one of the aspects that we provide to military spouses is that what I mentioned earlier, the career coaches. Available through Military OneSource at no charge. Those career coaches are master's level certified career counselors, and they are there at no charge to spouses as often as a spouse needs to use them. One of their areas of expertise is assisting a spouse in determining which program is best for them. So they're going to work with the spouse, and they won't tell a spouse which school to go to or which program to go to. But they'll get on with a spouse, and they'll utilize a lot of different resources that are there from Department of Education and other areas to really kind of make the best choice to help that spouse and educate the spouse. We know that, you know, most of our spouses are young. And you know, the demographic that's in this room, we've got a lot of seasoned spouses here that are very successful in their own right. But when we look at our younger spouses, being able to provide, I did say seasoned. You can laugh at that. Seasoned spouses. But you can really make good determination, and we want to be able to help that spouse make that determination on, you know, I heard from this school that they've got a program for military spouses and it's going to cost me $10,000 to get through the program. What our coaches will do is work with that spouse to say, you know, there's other schools that may have the same program or similar programs that may only cost $4,000 and may have a higher level of graduation. So you could take that other $6,000 and use it to further your education, to get a different type of certification, so to help that spouse make the best choice. But the bottom line is that the spouse has to make the choice. And our goal is to be able to give them the information and tools to make good choices.
Well, great. So Liza, you did work as a software engineer for a while, and then you sort of branched out in a more entrepreneurial career, started your own company. Hoping you can talk a little bit about sort of how entrepreneurship might be a good option for military spouses looking to start their own businesses, and what sort of challenges you faced along that path.
Sure. So entrepreneurship, I think, is another path that military spouses can take in order to create your own opportunities. That's how I started my first business originally. I wanted a flexible work schedule, so I went to my boss and I pitched the idea of me becoming a consultant, and I started my own software consulting firm from doing that. So I think, you know, military spouses are great at creating their own opportunities, and the entrepreneurship is a good route if you are interested in running a business and creating things. You know, there's lots of challenges that come with that as a military spouse, moving with laws and regulations, so you want to make sure you're plugged into good organizations that can help you kind of navigate that information. But entrepreneurship is an amazing way to create your own space, and in the tech space especially, there's lots of room for innovation all the time. And what I've seen a lot in the spouse community is they start businesses that help the community too, and they innovate in their own ways. And so entrepreneurship is a wonderful path.
We are going to be coming to audience questions soon, so everyone just start thinking and get ready. But I have one last question for the panel. The point of today's conversation is to sort of spark something with military spouses to want to pursue careers in tech. So if it did for anyone, either in the audience here or online, which I really hope it did, I'm hoping we can go down the line and each of you can provide sort of quick tips for first steps for someone who maybe doesn't have any experience in the tech world.
I'd like to say that it's a double-edged sword. The same thing applies to the transitioning military and veterans as I would say to the spouses. The double edge is this. In industry, we have to talk to leaders about the value and the potential of the military spouse because they don't really understand it. They haven't worked with it. It's not their fault. They've had successful companies doing it the other way. But we have to deliver that message. And the other side of that sword is you have to appreciate that you have a lot to offer. You do so much right now simultaneously every day in what you do. So that's the other part of the equation. And I'd like to share a quick story. The day that we did the ribbon cutting for this pilot that we're doing for these 19 spouses, I spent about a half hour before the ceremony, and they were all in tears because they realized that this had never been done before. This was a pilot program. They were the first. They are the pioneers. And that when it's done, these 19 spouses are going to be successful. And they're going to pave the way for those coming behind them. And you talk to them, and each and every one of them is committed to not only successfully complete this training program, but to successfully enter the IT industry. And when you see the passion and when you see the dedication in each and every one of those spouses, like I said, they were in tears, it's amazing. And I know that they're going to be the first, and they're going to do a great job, and that there are going to be many, many, many more that are going to follow.
Liza?
I would say the biggest thing that I see when spouses come to me and they're like, oh, you're a software engineer and you're in tech, oh, you must be super smart. Like, don't be intimidated by it.
She is super smart, by the way.
Well, but don't be intimidated by it. Anyone can learn it. It's a skill that anyone can learn. And I'm talking mostly to coding and that kind of development. But there's all kinds of different jobs in tech, product management, UI, UX design. I mean, there's all kinds of different arrays. So don't be intimidated. It's like learning an instrument. It's a new language. It's different, but the more you do it, the better you get. The more you're exposed to it, the more you learn. It's a skill built over time. So don't be intimidated by it. And then go explore. If you're thinking about getting into tech and maybe you don't have any reference, don't be afraid to explore different options, like go to Coursera.com, Lynda, Lynda.com, a couple of the other online learning. It's free. You can explore the courses and just see what you're interested in. See what side of technology you're most drawn to, design or coding or back-end or data engineering, those types of things. So you can get a feel for what it's like, and then you can begin kind of searching for, okay, what training do I want to get involved in to start developing that skill?
And I'll kind of say you have got to own it. You look around the room here, and there are amazing military spouses in this room right now that you know, whether it's Amy Bouchatz, whether it's Liza or Liza and Erica, whether it's Brian Alvarado, who you're going to hear from later, amazing spouses that really are owning it. A quick story, a spouse that many of you might know, Cece Gallagher. Her husband was stationed here in the DC area. She worked for an employer that told her when they were PCSing that they weren't going to be able to keep her on board. So she walked into one of our MSEP partners, a small company in Crystal City, BAM Technologies, IT company. Walked in cold with no IT experience or background whatsoever. Introduced herself to the leadership, said, you know, I've looked at your company, I'm impressed with what you're doing. How can I be part of your company? I'm committed to being part of your organization and your culture. 4 weeks before she PCSed. She said, I'm PCSing, I'm leaving the area, and you know what? They hired her. She went to Fort Carson and she worked remotely for 2 years in Fort Carson. Today, she's in Fort Irwin, literally, the middle of nowhere in America. And she's working for that company again. She's at advanced Scrum training this week, doing amazing things, no IT background, but found an opportunity, seized the opportunity, and she's owning it. She's also started her own business. She just landed a great contract, working with organizations serving service members and their families. So if you own it, you can really take advantage of all these resources that everybody has in place, but it really comes down to the spouse taking action.
Great. Do we have time for a couple of questions, if there are any in the audience? We'll go. Got a mic coming for you.
Hi, my name's Anna Rape. I have a company that I started partly out of necessity because I found myself in a state that not only could I not get licensed in as an attorney, it's also very much in the middle of nowhere. So we've spent 2 back-to-back tours in New Mexico, and we're still there. And one of the things that I found, I'm also a volunteer chapter lead with Hiring Our Heroes with the Military Spouse Professional Network. And we're seeing incredible success. We are seeing people get jobs. We're connecting with those local employers. But as I watch MSEP, which I love, MSEP is awesome, but one of the things that I struggle with having this involvement with the center of the country is some of these major employers, as they start to talk about, well, yes, we're going to hire all these people, there's still large swathes of the military spouse community and large swathes of locations around the country that are absolutely being left out of this discussion. So while I am so thrilled with what is happening, I guess I want to kind of ask and challenge to see if there's more we can be doing for some of these partners to be exploring not just the remote work opportunities. I'm also an employer. I employ 2 military spouses as employees, and I have about a dozen more as contractors. And a lot of what Liza was saying too absolutely rings true to me. When you call another state and say, I need, try to ask them questions about registering as an employer, they absolutely struggle to get their head around this idea that you have no business nexus in that state. And the employee that you're trying to hire is only a tax resident of that state. They are not also located in that state. They have no comprehension. And the struggle that I'm finding is that this is not just a military spouse-owned company issue. This is going to be increasingly, as the entirety of industry moves forward, it's going to be a bigger issue for all businesses that are hiring remotely. So I guess help is really what I want to say, and also just, is there moves? I know MSEP is about the bigger employers, but what are the steps being taken towards connecting with those major regional employers as well in some of those states where we have a really large presence? I mean, so New Mexico has 3 military installations. But yet it's still an issue. So it's really, I guess, Eddy. Sorry, I know I'm preaching to the choir in a lot of ways, but yes. And even Microsoft. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that too.
Well, I'll just start off, and I think that you brought up a really good point, that this is not just a military spouse issue, especially when we look at the change in industry and how industry is employing more individuals, whether it's remotely, whether it's through the gig economy. And when we've got big players as partners, like a Microsoft, like an Amazon, we've all seen the news over the last few days of Amazon's branching out into the local area as well into New York. We have to leverage those relationships and utilize those employers. I think another aspect of that is our employers that we work with through MSEP recognizing the needs at the regional level, at the local level, and finding ways to work with smaller companies. I can tell you, Microsoft is not just Microsoft. They work with a lot of employers, and they realize that there are opportunities there where they can influence some of those smaller companies that they work with as their partners. So it really kind of is that trickle-down partnership where it starts with the federal government, trickles down to big industry with the goal of then trickling down further. So, sir, I think you probably have something to add.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. You're correct, Eddy. I mean, 360 companies now have hired from our program. Those same 360 companies are going to be interested in this group that's going to be graduating on February 28th, this spouse pilot program. And it's going to grow to 500 by 2020. I'm sure of it. So, yes, companies can influence, can help, and are going to, in this case, Microsoft knows just how talented the military spouse is, and we are doing something that hasn't been done before.
I was just going to say, I think you bring up a good point too, because a lot of times you hear companies say, we want to hire military spouses, everyone come to Seattle. Not quite, possible. I live in Hawaii right now. So, I mean, I think sometimes that's a little discouraging from the military spouse community when you hear some of those things, but just to know that companies are working on it. Like we at MadSkills are plugging in remote teams for companies so that if they don't know how to create a remote team, we'll do it for them. We'll create the spouses for you. We'll come in and set up the remote teams and make sure they're compliant and all of those things. But working together, big, all the way down to the small is what's really going to help the issue.
Well, we are unfortunately out of time. I know we could talk about this much more, and hopefully you guys will throughout the rest of this conference today. Panelists, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like my big takeaway is that while there are a lot of resources that are already out there, there's still so much more that can be done. Microsoft is taking steps towards that. There are things that Congress can do. DoD is always trying to recruit new partners to work with. So hopefully this conversation will keep going. Thank you so much to our audience for joining us here and online. Please stick around. The next panel is going to be moderated by my colleague, Greg Hellman, about financial stability for military families. So thank you all again.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Politico defense reporter Greg Hellman.
Hello, everyone. It's a great panel, moderated by my colleague Jacqueline. Thank you for that. I'm Greg Hellman, Politico's defense reporter and author of the Morning Defense newsletter, and I'm thrilled. Give people a second here to move around. As I was saying, I'm thrilled to be moderating Politico's second editorial conversation today, improving financial stability for military families. Now, military families deal with a very specific set of financial challenges different from the civilian population. Frequently relocations or deployments can add financial strain that can have a ripple effect on their ability to pay mortgages, consumer and student loan debt, and build personal savings. DoD studies have shown that military families tend to be targeted by lenders with excessive fees at higher rates than civilians. And this is all compounded by the fact that active duty military spouses are estimated to earn about 40% less than their civilian counterparts. Now add to that sequestration and budget cuts, which the president has indicated could be coming next year. And these factors could throw a potential wrench into the financial lives of some military families. But it's not all gloom. DoD offers a myriad of resources, from education and employment resources to transition assistance programs. And this is a critically important issue that I hope will resonate with the members of our audience here today. So with that, I'd like to welcome our panelists here to discuss. We have Jerry Walsh, the president of FINRA Investor Education Foundation and the senior VP for Investor Education. We have Kate Harrell, a military personal finance expert. We have Rosalinda Mori, the Director of Applied Research at the Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse. And finally, Carol Reynolds at the end of the line here, a senior attorney for the Division of Financial Practices at the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC. So welcome, panelists. And for our live stream viewers, please don't forget to join the conversation at #MilSpouseSalute. And I also have an iPad here on stage, and we'll be tracking any questions for the panel throughout the conversation. So with that, let's get started. And let's kick the conversation off with Rosalinda, actually, if you don't mind. I know you're a couple down the line here, so heads up. Rosalinda, in your research role at the Institute, what keeps coming up as a top concern for military families?
Yeah, absolutely. So we collaborate with Blue Star Families on the annual Military Family Lifestyle Survey, and we've done this for a number of years, but there are common themes to barriers for financial stability. Obviously, number one, always a top discussion is spouse employment and underemployment. There have been improvements in the general overall unemployment rates for many populations, veteran, post 9/11 veterans, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, but military spouses is definitely one population, although the unemployment rates have decreased over the last 5 to 10 years. Certainly that proportion, they're still 4 times higher than their civilian counterparts. So obviously much to pay attention to, and you know, definitely a contributor to financial stress. So if you're not employed, how can you contribute? Underemployment is also a key aspect. I think we focus on the job, but what about the career and the quality of career? And there's an earnings gap. Military spouses can make up to 38% less than their civilian counterparts, and certainly the higher the education, the greater the gap. So certainly can lead to some financial strains on military families. But I think, like you mentioned it in the discussion, there's other aspects, right? The mobility, the frequent moves, the PCSing. There's a cost to moving, and it's not just spouse employment. I think there are unanticipated expenses that you don't even think about. And with one move, okay, but 2, 3, 4, 5, the added of all of that definitely has an impact, a financial impact to military families. The cost of housing, you know, I think there's an assumption out there that people live on military bases, and that's true for some, depending on availability, but some families choose to live off base. And there's allowances for it, but sometimes the allowances are less than what the real estate market is. So where do you come that? Where does that come from if the spouse is unemployed or underemployed and so forth? So all of these, I think, added impacts can really contribute to financial strain.
Yeah. One result that really stuck out to me when taking a look at that survey, and you touched on this point a little bit, was this figure of military spouses identifying as underemployed.
Right.
I believe the figure cited in the 2017 survey was 40%.
Right.
Was that proportion surprising to you? Was that a surprising result? Is that going up or down? What have you found?
I mean, I think that we generally are finding an improvement over the years, but I look at it from obviously within the sample, but I also look at it within federal data as well. And like I said, there is improvements. And you hear about all these employment initiatives. There's definitely been improvements to spouse employment. But I think the conversation also needs to lead to quality of employment as much as just being employed in just jobs.
Yeah. Carol, if we could turn to you. The Federal Trade Commission has undertaken really strong enforcement and eyed new rules on financial abuse for military families. For example, it launched the Military Task Force, which is aimed at identifying the needs of military consumers and developing initiatives to empower service members. So I was hoping we could start off with, maybe you could describe to us a little bit what kind of protections the FTC offers to military families.
So there are a lot of protections under federal law for military consumers. Just to take some examples, the Military Lending Act, of course, protects dependents, it protects service members and their dependents. It's an active duty situation with this law that it's looking at. There are protections that limit the rate to 36%, and the concept of a rate is very broadly defined. So it's not just interest, it's all sorts of credit fees and even ancillary products that are for credit. There are also protections in this law that limit provisions in contracts that are very common, allotments, and as well as other types of very difficult provisions you might have to find. If you're trying to exercise your rights, there may be limitations. It makes those illegal. It makes arbitration clauses illegal. It makes the waivers that may be mandatory of your rights that you may see in some of these contracts. It makes all of under state or federal law, it makes all of those illegal. And a whole host of other requirements that you may commonly see in contracts cannot apply in the military situation when there's an active duty. Now, there are a lot of very strong protections in terms of remedies as well. For example, there are criminal penalties that kick in under this statute. There also are civil, many types of civil relief. Consumers can enforce it themselves as well. And another interesting provision of this law is that the contracts that do have this that may be illegal are deemed void ab initio from the outset. So it has a retroactivity feature that can kick in. Another interesting statute that protects service members is the Service Members Civil Relief Act. This one is enforced but through justice. It applies to credit. Well, there are a lot of different provisions in this statute that are very protective in the military area, but one of them in the credit area, to take an example, applies to credit that you took out before you went into service. Remember, I told you the Military Lending Act, on the other hand, applies to credit that you may be taking out during the period of service. So back to SICRA, if you have credit you took out beforehand, this law will reduce the interest rate, and again, in this context, interest is fairly broadly defined, to 6%. It's not automatic. It doesn't just kick in by itself. You have to provide a copy of your orders and a letter to the creditor in order to be able to take advantage of this. But once you do, they must reduce that rate to 6%. And by the way, it's not just deferred. They cannot just tack it on to the end of your obligation. It's absolutely forgiven, totally. There are a number of other protections in this law. It's a very expansive law in terms of foreclosure protections, protections with respect to default, protections of termination of in housing leases, vehicle leases. And just to go into the vehicle lease area for a moment, it definitely does allow you to terminate your leases that you took out before you went into service, but there's actually a provision in this law that allows service members to terminate leases after they've gone in under certain circumstances, if they're being deployed for at least 180 days or they're going to PCS outside of the continental United States. And why would you want to terminate the lease, you might ask? Well, there are lots of reasons, but here's a good one. If you've read your lease carefully, which is really important, but it's often in fine print, it prohibits, very commonly, it prohibits you from taking that vehicle out of the country. In fact, many of them prohibit you from taking it out of state. So this law can kick in and help you in that situation. It's very important, and what it does is, in addition to allowing you to terminate, it limits early termination penalties. There might still be some certain other types of charges that are applicable, but it does eliminate the early termination penalties. And many people are drawn to leases, by the way, because, including in service, because the payments are lower. They're lower for a reason. You're not buying the car, you're leasing the car, but nonetheless, it does seem to make it more affordable in the first instance. But there are always trade-offs for that. And so you have this lease, and you want to be considering what you're going to do if you are deployed or you have a PCS situation outside of the country. So this law is very extensive. The Federal Trade Commission also has been enforcing Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act, which prohibits deceptive or unfair acts or practices in a number of very interesting cases that have had impacts in the military area. One of those quite recently was the Sunkey case. In this case, this company used websites such as Army.com, ArmyRecruit.com, Navy.com, NavyRecruit.com. That sounds pretty convincing, doesn't it? It sounds like, wow, this is where I need to go if I want to get information about military recruitment, or maybe I want to sign up. Well, a slight problem there. That really wasn't what they were doing, and this was, as was in the charges, what they were doing was lead generation. So they were encouraging you to put your personal financial information in. In fact, just to take one example, they had this big, in bold print across the screen, U.S. Army information request, and it sounded like, okay, I'll put this information in and give it, and the Army will get it. No, that's not what was going on. What they were doing was selling the information for $15 to $40 a pop, and it was going to post-secondary schools.
And Carol.
So the commission charged that as a deceptive practice, and that's been relinquished. That's under order now, and the sites have been required to relinquish that. There are many other cases that we've gotten into recently that affect the military. I'll give you one or two other examples here. Another one is Strategic Student Solutions. This was part of a huge sweep that we did in partnership with the states. And we brought a number of cases to go after student debt. This was student loan debt relief and credit repair. Allegedly, that's what they were offering, but not really, of course. And we brought cases across the country in connection with this sweep called Operation Game of Loans. This company is now under order, but they were saying that they would reduce your student loan or eliminate your student loan debt, and they would help you repair your credit, and you should make payments to them, and they would help remove this situation or remedy this situation. No, that's not what was going on. And in fact, what's happening here is what they were very good at doing was taking upfront fees, approximately $1,000 upfront. They were very good at that. And also charging fees often on a monthly basis. And they were not reducing your debt. They would take your payments, but they weren't applying them. And they were not also fixing your credit. By the way, you could do a better job of doing that yourself, and you wouldn't have to pay the fees to do it. In one more example, another case of deception that was alleged, another in the fraudulent area of veterans charities another operation that we brought in the sweep. 100 cases were involved in this. Every state in the United States was involved in this, and Guam and Puerto Rico and American Samoa in bringing these cases with fraudulent charities where they're taking your money, they're removing your money, and they're claiming they're going to be using this money to help veterans. In fact, that's not what they're doing at all. Either the money was going to administrative purposes, someone's pocket, individuals' pockets. Sometimes they claimed that there would be a deduction if you wanted to donate cars or other things, and in fact, they weren't even registered for tax exemptions, and so it was not tax exempt at all. There are many other remedies and many other rights under federal law that we can talk more about as we continue.
Yeah, great. So a lot of really great examples there, Carol. Jerry, I want to turn to you here for a second. We just heard a bunch of examples of certain schemes or attacks on military families and their finances, but you over at FINRA, you help provide financial education tools and training to service members. So could you talk a little bit about what service members and their families can do to empower themselves to protect against these types of cases that Carol just described for us?
Absolutely, delighted to. About a dozen years ago, we started a military financial readiness project, and it's a multifaceted program, and we partner with a number of organizations, including federal government agencies like the FTC and the Securities and Exchange Commission, but a lot of nonprofits. And really, one of the things that we've done is coordinate with the personal financial managers on installations through DoD and through the services to help equip them with information and resources that service members and their families can use. But we recognize that there has historically been, and to some extent there continues to be, a little bit of a stigma going to the personal financial management office on installations. And so we try to change that conversation. But one of the things that we did that really follows on to something that Rosie said and our panelists who have preceded us, when we first launched our campaign, did some research to understand what some of the issues were. And we were focusing on active duty service members, honestly, because we had some fine money that it evolved from mis-selling to service members of financial products. And we realized that, yes, there's a great deal that active duty service members face challenges, barriers, but the spouses seem to be an underserved audience. And so we partnered with the Association for Financial Planning and Counseling Education and with the National Military Family Association to develop the FINRA Foundation Military Spouse Fellowship Program. And what that does is it empowers spouses to earn a credential that is a portable and career-enhancing credential, the Accredited Financial Counselor Designation, the AFC. And that credential is a credential that many of the civilian workers and contractors who serve the personal financial management programs on installations are required to have in order to do their job. And so we were helping to build this cadre of military spouses who could not only learn about best practices in managing their own money, but would be credible force multipliers for DoD's personal financial readiness mission and for the FINRA Foundation's mission and for all the good efforts that so many nonprofits. There's no lack of information that's available through personal financial managers, but how wonderful to be able to talk with a military spouse who has walked the walk, who has served along with his or her, because we do have some male military spouse fellows in our program, but people that understand the issues that military families are facing and can really work with them within their community to help solve that problem. So if I had a magic wand, I would destigmatize going to personal financial management. I would think of it as an opportunity to plan, to save, to think about new ways that I can manage my money, and I would work with some of the FINRA Foundation fellows to try to make my financial goals a reality. So that's the wand I'll wave.
It sounds like a fantastic program, and I know all our military veterans and families out here know the importance of force multipliers, so thank you for that as well. Kate, I wanted to turn to you for a second here because you're a military spouse as well and a personal finance expert. So from working with your clients, what have you found to be some of the big impacts of transitioning out of services on military families' finances?
Transition is truly, I think, the single biggest thing that happens in anybody's life. I think it's bigger than marriage. I think it's bigger than having kids. And most people come into transition with not enough information and with very unrealistic expectations about what it's going to look like when they get out into the real world. They tend to underestimate the value of their military pay and benefits, and they tend to overestimate how much money they're going to make when they get out. I refer frequently to some studies that Rosie has done that talks about how long it takes veterans to find jobs and how frequently they change jobs once they leave the military. So it creates this long period of instability for a family. And one of my personal pet passions, I should say, is that I really want everybody the first day they walk into the military, they come out of boot camp, they get their first paycheck to think, what's my life going to look like when I get out? Because nobody stays in the military forever. And if you start thinking about the process when you're younger and then you sort of figure out some sort of plan and then you adapt it as your life changes, as you have children, you marry, maybe you buy a house, but you continue thinking, hey, this day is going to come. Because it is very unsettling for a lot of people. Even for people who are very prepared and educated, it's unsettling. But if you're not prepared, you don't have an education or you haven't built a strong financial foundation, it can really be a very negative experience.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of that, what's one of the most common mistakes you see families make during that really critical phase of transition that you just described?
Just one. This is an unpopular one, but I will defend it left and right. Buying a house. It's a horrible time to buy a house. I try to get it through to people when I say, you know how people tell you if someone dies, don't make a big decision for a year? This is a death. This is a death of the life that you've known it. Don't make any permanent decisions for at least a year. And buying a house is kind of a permanent decision.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Rosalinda, maybe we could turn back to you. Financial uncertainty. It's a challenge that a lot of military families face. What's the impact of that on service member readiness, have you found?
Yeah, I mean, I think that uncertainty comes through the various aspects that we talked about, right? The spouse unemployment, the moving, the mobility, and so forth and so on. But the combination of all of that impacts the military families and adds a financial strain to it. And I think that ultimately also impacts the willingness to continue service and the willingness to recommend service to their own children and to other people. So it has a huge impact. I do want to add something to the transition. If I had a magic wand, I think that we don't talk about transition part of that, because it is a very critical period that I don't think people are prepared for. In our survey, the Blue Star Family's annual military families lifestyle survey, we found that more than half of them that were separated within a year had less than $5,000 in savings. And when you think about the time to find a job, for the most part, it took people longer than expected, 3 to 6 months. So is $5,000 enough for the 3 to 6 month time period, especially when spouses are not employed or underemployed? Probably not. I think that the people that are well prepared are financially well prepared as well. But there has been much evidence that shows that the ones that are not actually have a higher credit debt to income ratio than the ones that are not. So I guess I'd love for people to really think about transition as soon as they enter the military.
If I might jump in there.
Yeah.
One of the issues with financial uncertainty is related to the issue of occupational licensing, licenses that are required for military spouses, and the need to relicense yourself when you go from one state to another. The commission the staff has a staff report up on its website about this, and including there's a section on military families and the impact on military families and possibly what could be done about this. There's, of course, some attempts that have been made already at compacts among the states to try to reach some agreement for reciprocity, model laws, and more specifically, some things that have been tried have been, just to take a few examples, have been to look at states that have substantially equivalent licenses and try to encourage reciprocity there, to try to have expedited licenses, or perhaps to have some form of temporary license that could work. Now, one of the issues, though, has been even with the states where they have tried the compacts among the regions, that they don't always reach out to the same areas. They don't always cover all of the needs for licensing. For example, teaching is one of the occupations where there's still a big problem that's often left aside. Some of the medical areas, nursing, some of those have been covered more often. So this is something for thinking about in the future.
And before we leave the sort of impacts of a lack of financial readiness, one key issue for the active duty service member is the potential loss of a security clearance, which can be the bellwether for the loss of a career, which can then send the family into a deeper spiral. So just didn't want that to not, get said.
Sure. And when you're talking about loss of a security clearance, obviously that opens you up to a whole host of government jobs. What's the strategy there? If you don't have a security clearance, maybe you're not looking for immediate employment with the federal government, you're looking for something else in the civilian sector. How do you begin to approach a challenge like that?
Well, to approach a challenge like that, I think there's a little bit of a translational work that you need to do in sort of figuring out what your skills are and how they translate to the civilian world. But if you lose your security clearance as an active duty service member, you are likely to lose opportunities for promotion and ultimately lose your job.
Right.
So it's not only for the kind of the future, it's also for the immediacy. Mm-hmm. And especially if you've bought a home in a community where you didn't really intend to live forever and all of a sudden your military career has ended, the difference between being, sort of separated without retiring, whether you're medically retired or you're retired after 20 years of service, is quite different in terms of the benefits that you have. So whenever you're making that transition, you need to think about what benefits ride with you and what's required in order for employability down the road.
Yeah, Great point.
If I might add something to that, the commission has actually pursued some cases over time with debt collectors, and one of the threats that have been made have pertained to these loss of security clearance. Pay up, whether it's your debt or not, someone else's debt, or maybe even paid the debt, because we could pursue you in your security clearance. And this is a very, very serious problem, so we really have gone after this sort of thing.
Carol, I appreciate you bringing that up. What can military families do to protect themselves and be aware of some of the schemes and threats that you've described. It's great that we have a federal regulatory body to protect the population out there. But on an individual basis, have you seen things that help work?
We have a lot of information on our website of tips of what to watch out for and how to handle these things, what your rights are, what steps you should take, and of course reporting it to the Federal Trade Commission. We try to make it as easy as possible to do that. If you go to ftc.gov, file a complaint. I mean, this is really important because although we can't represent individuals, we are bringing cases to enforce the nation's laws, and there are a number of laws to protect consumers. Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, and of course Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commission Act prohibiting deceptive or unfair practices. As I said, there's a lot of material on our website also to help consumers who find themselves in difficult straits, which could ultimately lead in that collections problem area, but sometimes it can be triggered by identity theft and issues in that area. And we have a whole identity theft site, which is identitytheft.gov, which tells you step by step what to do if you think you've been a victim or you're concerned about that. It's basically how to get your life back. What steps should I take first? What should I do next? We also have a lot of information related to this area. Your rights just expanded in September. As of September 21st, for example, the right to a credit freeze. If you're concerned about people accessing your account, you can cut that off now. In fact, if you do it online, you have the right to cut off access within 1 day. And for those who think, you know, maybe I need to apply for credit, maybe I was a little hasty there, not to worry. I mean, you have the ability to turn that freeze off now. Again, if you do it online, within 1 hour, you can turn it off. And so that you could go ahead and apply for credit and access can be restored to your account. And then you can freeze it again if you decide that you want to. And there are many other types of protections here. Fraud alerts that could be put on your record, on your consumer report, active duty alerts. So there are many types of protections here. All this we have information 24/7 free on our website to try to guide consumers and help them.
That's great. Now, as our audience might be aware, we also just had an election in this country where there were quite a few veterans elected over to Congress. This past summer, though, Congress passes an annual defense policy bill every single year. And the bill that was just signed into law this year included a host of provisions for military spouses, known as the Military Spouse Employment Act. Some of those, just for example, included issues targeted at increasing access to affordable child care, promoting military spouse entrepreneurship, a topic that I know our other panels have discussed quite a bit, and expediting federal hiring for military spouses. So I want to ask the panel, for starters, Rosalinda, are those some of the important issues for Congress to be focusing on, and are there others that you would suggest?
No, I mean, I think those are the steps in the right direction. For me, and I guess as an observer of both the veteran space and military spouse space, one of the things that I see often is that you lump the populations together and you try to put initiatives and forward. What ends up happening most often is you focus on one and not so much on another population. So the fact that this is specifically for military spouse in all those areas is a major improvement for sure, and we need to continue the pathway going forward in that direction.
That's great. Kate, as we've discussed, military spouses tend to be underemployed at a higher level than their civilian counterparts. So I wanted to focus in on this issue of child care a little bit. What's the impact of increased access to child care, and how does that really affect military families?
Obviously, child care is an essential issue if you're a parent and you have a job, regardless of where you live in society. But if you're married to someone who is gone for a year at a time, it becomes the defining factor in your life. I have 4 kids. I did not work when they were young because I was just not as good as some of y'all are. I could not do it. I could not maintain a job and be a parent to 4 kids when literally my husband was gone for a year. So not only access to childcare, but access to childcare that reflects the realities of the fact that we have military spouses who are nurses, who work 3 12-hour shifts a week. And if the CDC is open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. and you've got a 45-minute drive to work, well, now you have a problem. So there has to be a lot of creativity in figuring out what the solutions are, because as this whole thing has been about in the study of the USO, that we don't all look the same. We don't all need childcare from 8:15 until 4:25 every afternoon. But if we don't have childcare, we can't work.
Right, absolutely. So with that, unfortunately, with this great panel, we have run out of time here today. But I think there were some tremendous points made by all our panelists. We learned, yes,
If
Karen,
I could just
we'll
interject one more thing here.
Yeah.
We have another site, militaryconsumer.gov, and that has an enormous amount of information about earn, save, spend, borrow, and protect that you can access and just get very easily. So I've mentioned several sites, but that one is there as well, and I just want to encourage you to be aware of it and to utilize it.
That's great, and we've outlined, I hope, a whole bunch of great tools for military families to use in their own personal lives. Heard some recommendations of ways that they can take control of their own personal finances. And I want to thank the USO and Politico for putting on this fantastic panel, and for all of you being here with us today. So thank you.